So, when a young person breaks the law, what do? I mean, what's the right response? Do we focus on care and support, or is it all about accountability and justice? This isn't a small question. It's actually one of the most fundamental dilemmas facing legal systems just about everywhere.
And look, this question, care or accountability, it's not just some dry academic debate. It's a choice that sits right at the very heart of how we do youth justice. Honestly, it's a tension that has shaped everything, laws, policies, and of course the actual lives of so many young people for more than 100 years.
Okay, so how do we even begin to unpack this? Well, to get a handle on the debate, experts use this really useful framework called the welfare justice continuum. Now, just think of it like a sliding scale or a spectrum. On one end, you've got the pure welfare approach. This sees a young person who's offended as, first and foremost, a vulnerable kid who needs help. But then, on the complete opposite end, you have the pure justice approach, which sees them as a responsible lawbreaker who absolutely has to be held accountable.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll dig into that fundamental tension. Then, we'll break down the two models, welfare and justice. After that, we'll look at how scholars actually use this idea. And then, we'll wrap up by talking about what this all means today. Let's get into it.
Okay, Section 1, a fundamental tension. The first thing you've got to know is that in the real world, pretty much no system is 100% one or the other. Nope. Most of them are a mix, a hybrid, sitting somewhere in the middle of that continuum. And what's really interesting is that where they sit isn't static. It often swings back and forth, kind of like a pendulum, between these two different philosophies.
So let's dive into one end of that spectrum. Section 2, the welfare model. And as you can probably guess from the name, the main focus here isn't really the crime itself, it's the child.
The scholars Alder and Wondersitz really hit the nail on the head. They summed up the entire philosophy of this model in just 4 words: treatment rather than punishment. That phrase, it's the absolute essence of the welfare approach.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the welfare model's starting point is that kids are, immature. They're not fully rational adults yet. And because of that, when they offend, it's usually seen as a symptom of something else, maybe problems at home or things going on in their community. So the system's focus shifts to the child's needs, not their deeds. This means you often get a system where professionals, like social workers, have a lot of freedom to figure out what's best for the child, sometimes completely outside a formal courtroom setting.
All right, let's swing that pendulum all the way to the other side. Section 3, the justice model. And here, boy, the focus shifts big time. We move away from the child's needs and zoom right in on the offense itself.
So, where does this idea come from? Well, its roots are in what's called classical criminology. This is an older school of thought, and its core idea is pretty simple. People have free will. So from this point of view, the responsibility for a crime lies squarely with the person who chose to commit it. The thinking is, they made a rational choice, so they have to face a rational and, really importantly, a proportionate punishment.
And you can totally see how different this is in practice, right? In a justice model, young people are seen first and foremost as offenders who need to be held accountable. The punishment fits the crime. Sentences are matched to how serious the offense was, not to the kid's personal needs. And everything is super formal, guided by legal rights and due process to make sure it's consistent. The goals here are crystal clear: public protection, retribution for the victim, and making sure offenders take responsibility.
Okay, so let's just put them right next to each other to make it super clear. The welfare model, that's all about the child's needs. It sees them as vulnerable and the goal is treatment. The justice model, it's all about the offense. It sees them as responsible and the goal is punishment. I mean, you can't get 2 more different starting points than that.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This whole idea isn't just some neat theory tucked away in a textbook. Section 4, Scholars and the Spectrum. Academics use this continuum as a really powerful, hands-on tool to actually understand, compare, and even critique real-world youth justice systems. Okay, let's look at Neal Hazel's work from 2008. This was a huge study where he compared youth justice systems from all over the world. And what he found was that this welfare versus justice distinction, it was the single biggest factor explaining why systems were so different. He basically boiled the whole thing down to one simple question: does a system see the person in front of them mainly as a young person or mainly as an offender?
Then you've got other major scholars like Barry Goldson and John Munsey. They use this continuum to show how government policy oscillates, or, swings back and forth over time. They track how politics and public opinion can push that pendulum, sometimes towards welfare ideas, and other times towards tougher, more punishment-focused models. What their work really highlights is how these totally different ways of thinking can exist and even clash inside the very same system. And this isn't just a theoretical thing. We see it play out all over. For example, researchers like Chris Koonin and Rob White have used this exact framework to look at Australia's system. They've shown that, historically, Australian youth justice has swung back and forth between the two models. And today's system, well, it's a direct product of that history, with pieces of both welfare and justice ideas all mixed together.
So what all this research really shows is that this continuum, it isn't just some old idea from a history book. It's a totally essential way to understand the messy, complex reality of youth justice right now. Which brings us to our final section, the continuum today. Like we've been saying, finding a pure system is almost impossible. It's just incredibly rare. The reality, on the ground, is that pretty much everywhere is running a hybrid model. And that means you have these competing ideas, welfare and punishment, operating at the exact same time. And as you can imagine, that can create a lot of contradictions and real challenges for everyone in the system. And this tension is a global thing for sure. You have major international standards, like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, that are really pushing countries more towards the welfare side. And you have new ideas popping up, like child-first justice. But here's the kicker. Even these brand new approaches are still defined by how they relate to that original welfare justice continuum. It's like it's still the fundamental yardstick we use to measure everything. And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. As our societies and our justice systems keep evolving, will we ever move past this welfare versus justice debate? Will it eventually be replaced by something totally new? Or is this tension just so fundamental to the whole problem that we'll simply keep redefining it over and over for generations to come?